Hello everyone, welcome to another video, the first in a while. It's been a very long time, but it is, I'd like to say, lovely to see you all, I guess. Nice to have you here. As you can tell, I'm out of practice, and welcome to The Void. This is the corner of my sitting room. I sort of wasn't really in the mood to film in my room today. It's very messy, even messier than usual right now, and I just wanted to change of scenery. So we have this void. There's not really anywhere to put things up to like make it less void-like. So welcome to the void. It has been a while, so we're gonna get straight into it. These are the books that I read in February. Now some of them, I'm filming this on the 1st of April. Some of these I read like 2 months ago. So please bear with me if I can't remember the finer details of them. And we're going to be ranking them as always. So starting off with my least favourite book that I read in February, here we go. So this first one was a 1-star read for me. My first and so far only 1-star read of the year, and that is Fair Rosaline by Natasha Solomons. Now I've been trying to read this for so long because as soon as it was announced, as soon as I first heard of it, I was like, yes, I need to read this book. And it was a disappointment, obviously, because I gave it 1 star. So this is Romeo and Juliet from the perspective of Rosaline, the girl that Romeo is in love with before he falls in love with Juliet. And there are so many different ways that this could have gone, but it went a very weird and dark and twisted way, and I don't know if it worked, by which I mean it didn't work for me. I did not enjoy it. I'm rambling about this book so much. I'm just going to try to get to the point, so forgive me if this goes on for ages. So the author, and she said this in the author interview at the end, and I was like, yes, this makes the whole book make sense. She read Romeo and Juliet for the first time as an adult and was scandalised by all the things that were glossed over when she read it in school. Now those things I feel like I and most people of my generation are aware of because just literature is taught differently in schools. We grew up with the internet and a more sort of general cynical approach is available online immediately. I don't know if there's an explanation, if there needs to be an explanation. But anyway, basically, she read Romeo and Juliet and was like, but the children, and was sort of scandalised by the whole thing. And so read this story where Romeo is basically a sociopathic groomer and the friar is like a full-on serial murderer / kidnapper, and Rosaline is the only person who can see how unjust all of this is, because somehow, despite living in like 16th century Italy, she has a decent knowledge of second wave feminism. So yeah, I think that's the most succinct way of describing my problems with this book. I did write quite an extensive review. I don't know if it's gone up on my blog yet. I can't remember when it's going up on my blog. If it's already up, I'll link it below. If not, subscribe to my blog to read that. That was 5 minutes of footage. Whatever you saw was edited down from 5 minutes. I just want you to know that. Okay, so moving up to 3 stars. Now, February felt like the month of the short story collection. I just happened to have a few short story collections and books that are sort of also written in that sort of format coming up this month. And so the first one I'm going to tell you about is Tales from Grimlock Cove by Oscar Whiting. And this is a paranormal selection of short stories. It's a young adult collection. I think it's aimed at young adults. Yes, yeah, young adult book. And it's set on Grimlock Cove, where all sorts of mysterious things happen. And so yeah, I really liked that often short story collections are thematically linked, and this one was linked by setting. So although there were some themes that came up across the different stories, mostly the thing that linked them is they were all set in the same mysterious place. And I thought that was a really fun approach. So yeah, very just enjoyable, nice kind of paranormal read. I would have liked to see a bit more sort of connections between them, but I enjoyed the read. Yeah, it was lovely. The next one, okay, I'm probably going to rant about this one as well. Maybe I won't, I don't know. It was just a bit of a disappointment, and that's Song of the Huntress by Lucy Holland. So I loved Sister Song. It was one of my favourite books of 2022, whenever I read it. I loved it. It was amazing. So I had high hopes for this one, very, very high hopes, that were not met. Tragically, were not met. So this is, I think it's sort of in the same universe as Sister Song. There were definitely references to the events of Sister Song, and a couple of little links that you could spot if you'd read both, which I did really enjoy. It was set in 6th century, or is it a bit later on? It was a bit later on. Saxon England, Saxon Britain. And there's the Queen, and she has a sort of tense relationship with her king. And there's also the Huntress, a mythological figure, and they have this sort of romance going on. To be honest, I wasn't that big a fan of the romance, which is mostly why I didn't really enjoy this book. I was just like, it was fine. It was fine. Yeah, most of it I was just sort of going along for the ride, and I had a nice time. I did really like the relationship between the king and queen. I thought that was really nice, and explored. So the king is on the asexual spectrum because it's set, 1500 years ago. Then the words that we have today weren't used, but it was definitely explained clearly enough. And I thought that storyline was really sort of sensitively done, and just had a lot of poignancy and tenderness to it, and I really liked that friendship. But yeah, the main romance I sort of wasn't really fussed on. It was, I was just a little bit let down, to be honest, because I loved Sister Song so much. I have one more 3-star book to talk to you about, and that is Outraged, with the subtitle Why Everyone is Shouting and No One is Talking by Ashley Doty Charles. Now I actually picked this up because I've had it on my TBR for a while, but I was inspired to read this from another book that I will talk about later in the video. The only downside of ranking them is sometimes one read inspires another and they're out of order. But I was inspired to read more and investigate more into cancel culture after another book that I read in February. And I'd had this on the shelf for a while, so I picked it up. And I did enjoy it. I think it's a very long article rather than a book. And I was sort of expecting a little bit more nuance, investigation. It was a lot of one person's opinions. And I did think there were some really, really interesting arguments and things raised in this book. It is, as the title would suggest, about how we are easily outraged, about outrage culture, and about how outrage can be performative. And I thought that was fascinating and very relevant in today's society, in this day and age. There were some things, there was like a whole rant she went on towards the end about things that she deemed to be sort of useless things to argue about. But they were things like whether guys is a gender neutral term or not, or whether we should use the word nude to talk about tights and stuff like that. How do we approach that? And she went on a rant about how that was all useless and made some very insensitive comments that really sort of undercut a lot of her other arguments, I thought. So yeah, it sort of started off as an article. I think it was based on an article she wrote, actually. Yeah, it was based on an article and became a bit of a rant in some places, but did have some really interesting points. And I think it's still a good read for the modern social media world we live in. So, moving up into the 4-star books. First, I have a poetry collection to talk about, and that is Tristan/Isolde by Harry Bonnell. And this is about Tristan and Isolde, or Tristan and Isolde, whichever version of their names that you know. And yeah, it's a poetry collection about part of their story. It tells part of that legend through the medium of poetry. I thought it was really nicely written. I really liked the lots of different sort of styles of poetry, and you could always tell whose perspective it was and where the kind of story was coming from, even though it didn't have sort of narrative prose. So yeah, it was a lovely little collection of poems, something a bit different, and a very new and unusual way, but also in some ways a very traditional way of telling a mythological classic. Speaking of myths, the next one is a non-fiction book called Queer Villains of Myth and Legend. I don't think it's any surprise why I would be interested in this book. This is just a collection of little sort of tiny chapters about various figures who are villainous and in some way or another queer. The word queer, I think the meaning queer is used very liberally in this. Sometimes it is, you know, LGBTQ plus figures. Sometimes it is people who have become a representative of, or a sort of icon of the queer community. Sometimes it's just people who break those social and gender norms in a way that could be considered queer. So I thought it was used very liberally, which I quite enjoyed. So yeah, and it was, so there's quite short chapters. Some of them are illustrated. There we go. Nice little illustration for you. They're not all from Myth and Legend though. That is, the title is slightly misleading. You got the Sanderson sisters, for instance. You have some Doctor Who villains. There's Ursula from The Little Mermaid. I would interpret the title, if you interpret it very liberally, is a good title, in that some of them are queer villains who became legends or have become legendary in some way. So it was a fun little delve into some characters there. Yeah, it was just a fun read. I enjoyed it. And then the top 4-star read for me this month was The Sleeping Beauties by Lucy Ash. So this is a historical mystery set just after the Second World War. And so there's a mother and daughter who travel to London and they meet a ballerina from the Sadler's Wells Ballet Company, which I think has been renamed to like the Royal Ballet Company or English Royal Ballet or something. It's an existing company that still exists, but just has a different name. You can tell I'm very out of practice at this. And the daughter is very entranced by this ballerina who has her own ulterior motives. And it took us on such a surprising journey. I really, really enjoyed the kind of twists and turns of this book. There were a lot of family secrets, a lot of really interesting themes as well. So a big theme in this book was actually reproductive rights, which I did not expect going in. It talks a lot about reproductive rights and how in the sort of fictional characters in this world are at the start of our sort of modern idea of what a woman's right to choose is. And yeah, I thought it had so many depths and nuances to it. And I thought it also explored sort of how queerness was viewed historically in a really interesting way as well. I don't want to say too much because not knowing too much about it was part of the reason I enjoyed it so much, that I went in and it was this whole sort of unexpected story with all these reveals, but I did think the themes were really interesting and handled in such a sort of nuanced way. So yes, highly recommend this one. We are into the 5-star zone, and so the first 5-star book I'm going to tell you about is Bliss and Other Stories by Catherine Mansfield. Now, I read this I was reviewing for an app called Audrey, which is an audiobook app with a little bit of a twist, and I loved it. I thought it was such a fun way of experiencing the book. So we had the audiobook, which was read by the icon Juliet Stevenson, and at the end of each chapter there was a little chapter summary, or at the end of each story rather, because it's a short story collection, and also reflections and sort of little bits of context and background information. There was artwork from the period that related to the themes in the story. There were voice notes from one of the editors of the app giving a little bit of information, a few thought-provoking things to think about, and just sort of prompts to get you thinking about the story and engaging with it in a different way. It was like a book club in an app, and I really enjoyed the experience of doing it. So yeah, highly recommend Audrey. If you were keeping track, that was our second short story collection, and now we're on to our third, which is The Vanitas and Other Tales of Art and Obsession by Jake Kendall. And so all of these stories are inspired by different artworks. They are all about obsession. Usually obsession with art itself, but not always. And all different settings, all different characters, and it was just so good. Every single story was brilliant. I did have my personal favourites, but yeah, it was just a great selection of stories that really fitted well together, and there was a longer one towards the end that you could really get your teeth stuck into. Yeah, really, really great selection of short stories. The next one is a very highly anticipated read for me, and that was Waiting for the Flood by Alexis Hall. We all know I love Alexis Hall. I'm always looking forward to his books, and this is a re-release with a bonus. Well, it's sort of a bonus chapter, except it was longer than the original book. It was 2 short stories that were put together to make a whole novel, and it's the romances of 2 exes, so 2 people who have broken up, and this is them finding love afterwards. And it was just so sweet. Both stories were really, really different. The first one especially felt like a very unusual writing style for Alexis Hall. I thought it just had a different quality about it, and I really, really enjoyed that. Yeah, I just loved it. The romances were lovely. It was fun to see the kind of 2 sides of the same relationship. I think it was a really unusual approach to a story, and I thought it worked really well. The next one is Young Elizabeth by Nicola Tallis, and this is, as you can probably guess, a non-fiction book about the life of Queen Elizabeth I before she was queen. So it actually starts before her birth, with the Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn drama, The King's Great Matter, and takes us right through to the death of Mary I and Elizabeth I being declared queen. And I loved this book. It was so informative, so interesting. Lots of things I did know, and lots of things I didn't know, but the things I did know were presented in a way that didn't feel like, oh yeah, I know all this already. You know, it still felt fresh. I still got something new out of it from the new perspective. And a lot of the things that I did know about Elizabeth I's childhood, there are some very difficult topics to discuss when it comes to discussing her youth, and I thought they were discussed in a very sensitive way, but also in a way that felt true. When we're looking at historical figures, you know, we can't put our own modern sense of morality onto them, and so I thought that the explanation of kind of the moral expectations of the time was done really well as well. So yeah, I think this is a must read for any Tudor fans out there, whether you're new getting into Tudor history or you feel like you've read everything under the sun. I think there is something in this for everyone. Now, way back many centuries ago, by which I mean at the start of this video, I was talking about outrage and cancel culture, and a book that I read, which was How I Won the Nobel Prize by Julius Taranto. So this is another one that's going to be really hard to discuss. This is about, it starts off as a satire that basically, what if there was a university where all of the professors and lecturers who get fired for being cancelled because they did terrible things, that they could go there, and this place has like no rules about student-teacher relationships, for instance, or employee conduct, and it's just a free-for-all, and they can, you know, pursue knowledge and whatever they want to do. That's the kind of premise. And the main character, she is studying under one of these lecturers and makes a very controversial decision to follow him to continue her studies, even though she knows it's a terrible place to go. Obviously, this has all sorts of repercussions on her personal life, her relationship with her professor, and yeah, it starts off as sort of very dry satire with some almost funny moments, and of course, quite quickly it takes a very dark twist and really looks into what lengths people would be willing to go, how malleable people are in their opinions and in what they're willing to do for those opinions. There's so many interesting themes. I really want to find someone else who has read this book and discuss it with them. I think it's a bit of a Marmite book, judging by some of the reviews on Goodreads. But even if someone hated it, I would still want to like chat to them about it and be like, let's get into it. Let's talk about this book, you know? So yeah, it was really great. I listened to the audiobook narration was great. Yeah, I did not expect to find this book as brilliant as I did, but I found it brilliant. And so the number one book that I read in February was another audiobook, and that is Diva by Daisy Goodwin. Now, I am a classically trained singer. I'm a classical singer. That is my job, my day job, or evening job, I guess, because there's not much call for classical singing in the daytime. And when I saw a book about Maria Callas, I was like, yes, of course, I have to read this book. And I listened to the audiobook, and it was excellent. It was so good, and I just loved it. First of all, just from the perspective of like an audiobook in and of itself, it was really well done. There were little snippets of her performing between each act. They were sort of literally labelled as opera acts would be. And so Maria Callas, she was one of, if not the greatest singer of the 20th century, but was also very well known for being a socialite. She rubbed shoulders with a lot of famous people who appear in this book. You've got Winston Churchill, you've got Marilyn Monroe, you've got the Kennedys, you've got all of these famous people that she runs in circles with. And you definitely got a sense for her prickly character, for her flaws, for, again, the things that she's willing to do, the lengths she's willing to go, the lies she's willing to tell herself and others. And it was just such a great book. Really, really good sort of insight into her and her life. You could tell it was so well researched, and she felt so vivid and present in the course of the story. And you couldn't help but feel for her, even though in many instances you very much, you know, she could have got out and out of that herself. And there were times she was unlikable, but you still rooted for her. It was such a good book. Really, really excellent. Thank you for bearing with me on what has felt like a very chaotic video. It's nearly half an hour long, this footage. I hope I can edit it down into something coherent. So let me know in the comments. I know February was a while ago, but let me know what you read in February. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you would like to hear some more from me, see some more videos. My March wrap-up will be coming very, very soon as well. And I will see you next time. Ta-ra for now.